Good morning or good evening, everyone. Welcome back to CLI's Legal GenAI Conversations Series. In this series, we'll be discussing how generative AI is impacting the legal ecosystem way beyond the tech. In each session, we'll tackle one area of legal business or practice that has been impacted by GenAI and ask legal thought leaders and doers around the world, like these amazing folks, how they are managing the unforeseen, the challenges and the opportunities, and what they've learned along the way. And that brings us to this episode. There's little more fundamental to every business, legal or otherwise, than revenue. In law firms for a while now, that's been measured by the billable hour. In most law firms today, we still wrap everything in one parcel. Hours billed with expertise, performance, and value. So, if we look at it that way, it's a big problem, and it's getting bigger as AI, and particularly generative AI, is doing tasks faster, better, and cheaper, and now starting to advance into complex problem solving too. So what does that mean for law firms? Should we all immediately convert to fixed fees, subscriptions, and or value-based pricing, or something entirely different? What happens if we do? What happens if we don't? Where do we go to figure all of this out? Well, stay right here. Stay tuned in right here, because that's exactly what we're going to be discussing today in this session on Will GenAI Kill the Billable Hour Ever? We're going to do that with the help of these absolutely amazing panelists. First, Melissa Lyon, Executive Director and Experienced Designer at Hive Legal and CLI Advisory Board member. Jean Turner, Managing Director of Lawhawk and also a CLI Advisory Board member. And Tessa Van Doan, CEO and Practice Leader at Moores and CLI Advisory Board member as well. We seldom have this many CLI Advisory Board members together, so it's a real treat. So Mel, Jean and Tessa, a huge welcome back, and thanks very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks,
Absolute pleasure, absolute pleasure. Folks, I wanted to kick us off, first of all, before we jump into the nitty-gritty of the topic, to understand a little bit more about your roles and particularly how that brings you into the realm of billing, but pricing perhaps more generally as well. So Jean, you get to kick us off.
Thanks, Terry. So I'm the Managing Director of Lawhawk. We're a legal automation consultancy and been going now for about 9 years, so just a little bit longer than the CLI. We really focused on trying to help our customers to improve and then automate their processes. And initially, when we set up, we thought that we'd just focus on all the cool things you could do with the technology and that the lawyers would just be blown away by it and all want to use it. But what we found really quickly was that if you're billing by the hour, it often just doesn't really make that much sense to just chuck automation in. If you're not really thinking about your overall business model, there's a pretty decent chance you could end up actually doing the same type of work and the same volumes for the same people, but quicker and for less money. So it was a real wake-up call for us, I suppose, just understanding the need to think more broadly about the whole business model. We also work with in-house teams as well. And again, we're sort of working with them to try and understand, the costs of their processes, and particularly if they're outsourcing work to law firms, what the cost of that is, whether there's different ways they could work together and actually come up with different ways of charging that are better for the client, better for the firm, better overall outcomes. So we've got those two angles. And then actually we're lawyers ourselves, and in many ways we've been through already a lot of the stuff that I think law firms are just starting to go through. So very early on, we priced our work by the hour because that was the only thing any of us knew how to do. And what we found was that if you do the hit too well when you're using technology to power the solutions, there's actually no follow-on work. You get paid once, but the clients are actually using your solutions every day, every week, every month, every year, and they're getting great value from it. And so we just found that actually we weren't going to be sustainable if we didn't switch to some different way of recognizing how we could create value for clients and then how we could sort of capture a share of it in a different way. So I guess, some of our experiences is how we can help our law firm clients in particular to move through some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a journey, as we're going to discuss a little bit more as we get into this topic. And thanks for that, Jean. And speaking of journeys, Mel, you've been on one too, right?
I have been on one. And look, I loved that question, Terry, because it really made me reflect in terms of my pricing journey, where that started. And I think it started right from the start for me. And what I've done and where I've ended up have all contributed to that, and the focus that I have on the pricing side of it. So my current role is Executive Director and Experience Designer at Hive Legal. Hive Legal was a firm, or is a firm, that was established 11 years ago now, and with a very different type of business model. And a fundamental part of that business model is value pricing and not using the billable hour, basically. So for 11 years, we've had the experience of building the way that we wanted to price, and the processes and the systems and our approaches around all of that. But I think what really made me reflect was how I actually got there, and it's been informed by a lot of the different roles that I've played before. So I previously was a lawyer. I was a commercial litigator. I've been a partner in a smaller firm. I've been a lawyer in a top tier firm as well. And also then moving into the business development side of things. So looking at things from the point of view as owner of a firm, I suppose the revenue, and obviously running it as a business, but also then looking at the client relationship side of it and the client expectations side of it as well, which is fundamental to your pricing. And understanding what clients' needs are, their outcomes, and what they value, which is a lot of what we'll talk about today. So I think all of those roles that I had, pricing is a lot of the platform to a lot of that, or it's relevant to all of those different roles around the revenue building in your business model, how you work with your clients, and also how you work with your team as well, and those measures of progress and success that you have. So what I love about alternative pricing that we'll talk about today is that it pulls a lot of those things together. And I'm very passionate about a lot of those things, the client relationship side of it, the team side of it, and having a successful business as well.
And increasingly not becoming alternative, I guess. That's the other thing, right? Yeah.
Exactly. When will it be where we're just talking about mainstream pricing, which is based on value?
Yeah. But one of the really interesting things about Hive, I guess, is the founders, like including you, obviously, came to that having experienced working in different law firms, billing in different ways, and wanting to do things really differently.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I hope, we'll cover this later on, I think, too, but that you can't just look at pricing as a separate part of your business or your firm. It fundamentally lies under everything that you do, and the way that you approach your work with your clients and how you work with your team as well. It's not just slap a price on that. There's a whole lot of thinking, theory that comes with that as well. And I think we really had the benefit of being able to start a firm fresh, start from scratch, and build that up as we go. And so I will always nod to those who want to, and Tessa, who want to change the business models as well, that from traditional to a different type of way of pricing, because that change management part of it is extremely important.
And Tessa, I do want to pick up on what Mel was just saying, because for your firm, you had to go through that massive, I'm going to call it actually a transformation, because it wasn't just a transition. But tell us about that.
Thanks, Terry. So as Terry said, I'm from Moores. We're about 100 people, a mid-sized firm in Melbourne. We're a purpose-led firm, and importantly, we say a values-driven firm. We do law differently. We're 54 years old now, 55 years old, I think, and we switched off timesheets 13 years ago. So it was before my time. I didn't have to go through that pain and heartache myself. I just get to get to enjoy the benefits of somebody else's pain and heartache. But it was a massive transformation. And I've said this openly before, that, you know, it is such a huge transformation, that switching models, that you know, we lost clients in the process, and we lost people as well, who were so firmly entrenched in that traditional way of working that they could not shift their mindset to get around this new model. Importantly, picking up on what Mel said, for us, it is a fundamental part of my role as the CEO of Moores to be deeply involved in pricing, not least because of the revenue implications, but more so because our value-based pricing business model is actually a manifestation of our values. So it is a way that we can articulate to the world, to our clients, to our people, that this is what we value. We value creativity. We value client centricity. Like, we value putting the clients at the heart of everything that we do, not just worrying about time as an input. And so it touches culture as well, which I think is what Mel was saying. It's actually more than just your billing model, if you want to call it that. It's a way of working and a way of being as an organisation.
Yeah, it's kind of your North Star, isn't it? It's guiding you in every decision that you make.
It has to be, and not because of, people can get caught up in the financial metrics. It's not because of that. It's because of the way that you achieve that and how you practice law, which is what Jean was saying as well. Like, they had to actually change the way they practice in order to be sustainable. Yes, of course, we all need to be profitable and sustainable. But for us, it's much more than that. And I know it's the same for Hive.
Yeah, absolutely. Tessa, I want to stay with you for this next question that I want to ask all of you, actually. And perhaps it's slightly provocative, but I think it's an important one for us to touch on. And that is, do you see in the last few years, I guess, since generative AI has been around, whether it is genuinely putting pressure on law firms to reconsider the billable hour, or is it just a lot of discussion, a lot of hype? How are you finding that in the marketplace at the moment?
I would say less hype and more fear, actually, is what I'm sort of feeling and hearing. I think there is pressure on the top end of town. Otherwise, it wouldn't make the front page of the Fin Review, you know, like, is the billable hour dead? But what I find fascinating is that I think the pressure is actually coming from clients. So if, you know, it's coming from government, particularly from the in-house council sphere, like in-house, who are already stretched. We know that, in terms, you know, they've always been asked to do more with less. For them, they understand now that they should be pushing for alternative fee arrangements so as to get value from their engagements with particularly top end of town, I think. So I think it's real. I do think there is pressure. But one thing, and I know we've talked about this as a group and we'll discuss it later, I do feel like if we want to see a real shift away from the traditional model, that's something that almost has to happen as a collective. You know, like, as it's all well and good for us to do it in our little microcosms, which I love and I'm here for, and I encourage everyone to make the shift within their microcosm. But if we want kind of structural change and shift to see the real benefits of moving away from a traditional billable hour model, that sort of has to be ecosystem wide, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Mel, what about Hive? Are you seeing, or like, you know, within your own sphere or in the broader sphere, any sort of pressure? And I know you've obviously already drunk the Kool-Aid, so to speak, but in the broader environment, right?
Yeah. Look, I agree with Tessa. It's not hype. The conversations are real and they're happening. And I think part of that is because, unlike in previous years where AI hasn't been such a topic, and we sort of raised the idea of alternative, there hasn't been necessarily any incentive for a change, other than, as Tessa and I were talking about, that structural change that we can see that a different pricing approach can bring, and the benefits that it can bring to your clients and your team. I think now, though, that because generative AI is something that's impacting every one of us, not just in the legal context, but our everyday world. I mean, when are we not touched by or seeing when we pick up our phone? Do you want that rewritten by AI? All of that type of thing. So there is that much broader awareness of how it's impacting our lives. And so I think that idea that our clients are seeing it and then wanting it to be reflected in the way that their relationships are with their legal service providers. And fair enough too. I mean, when you're talking about us or the legal ecosystem traditionally always talking about the time that it takes to do something, fundamentally, if something's going to take, used to take 2 hours, now takes 5 minutes or less, much less, why wouldn't you be saying, surely that must cost less for me if you're pricing based on time? And so I'm hearing those discussions. I'm hearing, especially from the top end of town, how do we change what we're doing now, and approach it and look at those different ways, those alternative ways, which we hope will eventually be mainstream. Tessa, to your point as well around, that major shift across the legal ecosystem and not just happening necessarily in pockets.
Yeah, and I guess if we're seeing more and more clients asking the questions of their outside counsel about, have you used AI? Where have you used AI? And then needing to disclose that, it seems to me it's kind of logical that the very next question is, and how are you going to be pricing this work? It just goes hand in hand.
Yeah, and it's really interesting too. You don't want to get too much into the theory of value pricing, but if you could then say if it's cost based, then it might be said, well, it's costing us more. It's costing us more to use this technology. That's not what value pricing is about. Value pricing is about the value that you achieve, or you put to the outcomes that you're doing, you're creating, and it's not cost driven. So it's a completely different way of looking at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Jean, you've got this amazing perspective of having been in a law firm and now kind of working with law firms, but working with a whole bunch of other people. Are you seeing any of these sort of questions being asked, any kind of pressure building around this question?
I don't know how much pressure I'm seeing. There's people talking about it, and there's lots of conversations, and some of them sort of going in quite weird directions to some extent in terms of do you have AI hourly rates and jack them up hugely because it would have taken longer if we weren't using AI, or using e-billing guidelines and having AI review the narrations and looking for exceptions, and firms then sort of using AI to make sure the narrations comply with the billing guidelines before you put them in. Yeah, it's quite transactional and not really that productive, I don't think. I think a lot of the conversation is sort of grounded in what law firms currently do. And so, you bill by the hour, you're basically charging for tasks. And so I haven't seen as much conversation as perhaps I'd like to see about what actually could lawyers do and how do you create value, and perhaps, removing the fact that, you can do some of those tasks more quickly now, but you might do other things that would be more valuable, or maybe the client doesn't even need you to do those tasks anymore. And so there's a much broader, as we discussed earlier, it's the whole business model actually needs to change, and that's not easy to do in any event. I guess the structure of a lot of law firms, the people that are sitting at the top have most likely done very well under the current model, right? So until they start to feel pressure, they're not necessarily going to have a reason to want to change. And then it is quite a hard thing to then do, and not just for the law firms. I think it is the clients, and a lot of the clients have come from from working in firms, and they're used to the billable hour, and they think that it gives them sort of clarity and certainty as well. So as Tessa said, you need to get everybody kind of to look at how we work together. And I think one of the hardest things is that it actually requires much more time thinking up front about what are we even trying to achieve here. And everyone's busy, and sort of, I guess, when a project's on, everybody wants to get working. And so you need to find more time to have conversations up front about what is it that we're actually trying to achieve, what's the best way to do it, who's going to do what, and that's probably not really happening as much because people just haven't been trained even to know that's probably what you're going to have to do. So to sum up, I think there's more conversations, but it's still quite early, and people are sort of fumbling a wee bit, sort of knowing that things will have to change, but not really quite knowing exactly what that means for them and how they'll work with their clients and other stakeholders.
Yeah, that's a great point. And to pick up on what all of you were saying, we're kind of seeing the discussion points all over the shop. So some of it is you're using AI, therefore it should be cheaper. Some of it is you're using AI, but that also incorporates our enormous amount of intellectual property, if you like. So, we should be value billing, something like that. Or AI is now a knowledge worker. Let's give it a billable hour rate. And I'm not saying I agree with any of these. I'm just kind of throwing them out there. Or it's also kind of like, well, can you have a different pricing model if it's with AI, or a different pricing model if it's not with AI? But then we've got to retain our professional responsibility requirements around all of that. And of course, the recovery of cost issue that was raised as well. And so all of that throws me very easily actually into the next question, which is getting into a bit more of the nitty-gritty around viable alternative fee models. And I'm wondering firstly what they are. And Mel, I'm going to throw this one to you first. What are those alternatives, and how has GenAI perhaps tipped the scale in making, if it has, in making some of those models more attractive or feasible than perhaps others?
Yeah. Yes, a really, really good question. I think when you take the billable hour out of the way that you price, it incentivizes you to be more efficient as a firm and to get things done and to work out how you're going to get things done more efficiently and still deliver the outcomes to your clients. So I think what that means is utilizing technology and more generally, but also obviously more topically using GenAI, is how are you going to use it? What that means, I think, is you from the outset, when you're pricing matters or putting together the way that you're going to price, it can enable you to properly scope and work out what that work is going to look like. So you have more control, I think, as a firm in terms of what the price is going to look like. And I'd also say that control actually filters out to the clients as well, because what you're ultimately able to do is to provide a fixed price. So I think if we look at it from the umbrella point of view of what the alternatives are, it is a truly fixed price. It is that this is the price, and the firm has worked out how it's going, not just what it's going to provide to the client, but how it's going to be provided to the client as well. So that gives that comfort around that fixed price, both that it's going to work from the firm's perspective and the client's perspective as well. So I think overall it's that fixed price, set price side of things that we're going to see as an alternative rather to the billable hour, which is less like it just keeps going and building. And those billable hours can be capped, I know, but there's a whole lot of different side of things to that as well about what goes on in terms of the outcomes that are delivered under that model. But I would say that that use of technology is also the other alternative pricing then, which we're going to see more of, because you can actually work out what the firm's going to deliver and how they're going to deliver it, is the subscription models. Because there's going to be, it's a lot easier to package that work up, to know how it's going to be done and to actually put a price on that. And it could be, different options in the subscription models, as we've seen with a lot of other companies outside the legal ecosystem do now, your gold, silver, bronze, or whatever, with the different packaging. And so I think that GenAI is going to push us more towards those subscription models, because there is that element of scoping the work, how we're going to do it, and putting a price on that, which is once again, value driven. So I think the alternatives are there, fixed pricing, the overall value pricing side of things, the ways of doing things, but subscription models, I think, are going to become more and more popular.
Mel, do you see us, and I want to ask this question of Eugene and Tessa as well. Do you see us getting to the point in the not too far distant future where Gen AI may actually be used to determine the scope, and then depending on how good your data is, I guess, that you'd feed that in and it would come up with suggestions of what the pricing model might be? And I'm sure there's people developing those tools, or they're part developed, or they're fully developed but not perhaps yet rolled out extensively on that, in that respect. Do you see that as a possibility? Because it's kind of the next level up in a way from what we're talking about at the moment using the tech.
Can I just jump in?
Yeah,
Sorry, around
please.
that. Yeah, and we've already started doing that, not so much with Gen AI, but more from an automated point of view about putting those different options and what it could look like together, so that we have that as well. So yes, I absolutely think that would be possible as well.
Yeah. And I think that maybe the thing is, you've got 11 years of probably data that's in pretty good order to be able to do that. Tessa, the broader question about, what the alternatives are, but also if you could just add in that last one there about where we sit in terms of the tech.
I mean, as my position generally is that the tech should be used to augment the humans using the tech, right? So I think the same applies here in this situation that you've just articulated, Terry. Absolutely, we can get to a point where we're using the tech to automate parts of the whole pricing conversation and the whole pricing journey that we have with our clients. But I would never, ever allow that to happen in isolation of humans being part of that process, because so much of the value-based pricing model and to an extent non-billable hour models, the currency changes, right? So it becomes one of trust, which is like we say that trust is our greatest currency, and our pricing model puts trust and relationship and connection at the heart of everything that we're doing. And I would never, ever outsource that to a non-human.
Yes, you're going to push the button and say, here you go.
Yeah, absolutely. That human in the loop is so important, isn't it? And that starting point around that. Totally agree, Tessa.
Yeah, but I'm not against using the tech to augment the process to make it more efficient, so as to create, more valuable outcomes for our clients in a way that is more efficient as well for them and for us, because there will naturally be savings, whether that's of a cost nature, a time nature, a headache nature, a pain and suffering, whatever it might be. There will be some kind of savings that you can get from utilizing that tech.
Yeah, absolutely. Jean, again, you've got probably a slightly different perspective, or see this from a slightly different point of view. What do you see as the alternatives, and how's the tech kind of featuring into all of that?
Yeah, so for us, because the technology component means you're not just giving advice or recommendations, you're actually delivering something that they can use and continue to use. So as I said, that really sort of drove us to needing to move to a different model anyway. But subscriptions by far the best model for us, as everybody recognizes it's a bit of a holy grail in business. You've got that recurring revenue and predictability, so it's good from a valuation perspective, but it actually aligns our interests with our customers much better. We want them to have like a great solution that delivers the most value for as long as possible over the longer term. So if we can find ways that would enable that, and that we can then provide support for it, then that's good for the client and good for us. In terms of using AI, for instance, like I think that is a really good place where sometimes people will come to us with an idea of what they think the problem is and what output they want, and using tools like Perplexity or something like that is really quite helpful, just to say, look, what else should we be thinking about? What else could you do? How would it all fit together to create something that's even more useful and valuable? So I think there's a lot of scope there, just as a sounding board, and trying to sort of to get more creativity into some of the thinking before you jump to the answer. So there's definitely benefits there. I mean, we find again with subscription that once we've sort of built up a base of IP and things, we can build more quickly. So again, it would be crazy for us to be charging by the hour. If every project we did, we could actually deliver even faster. But it's actually better and more valuable. So we can reduce our upfront costs, but then recover the value over time. At the same time, the client's receiving the benefit of the value, and if they stop sort of finding it's useful, they can switch it off. So I think it just aligns everything really well, and it is a nice model. It just kind of continually allows us to keep thinking about the client. We're not chasing every bus going past trying to find more hours of time to fill, so we can be thinking about other things that we know they've got problems with and ideas that might be useful for them. So I think it's really good. We've got one of the things people say is it wouldn't work for I don't know, different types of legal practice, but we've worked with a law firm in the US in estate planning, and I just saw the other day they've rolled out a membership model, and so they've got all sorts of things. If you become a member of their estate planning, which you'd think would be a one and done type thing, but they've got annual reviews, they've got partial amendments, they've got family care meetings, collaboration, discounts on other services, legal updates on tax. There's a whole bunch of stuff. So like you can actually create offerings around quite different scenarios. If subscription doesn't work, and it doesn't always, like sometimes it's the one-off, then we'd always greatly prefer to try and do a fixed fee, try and figure out like what is it that you need, like what can we do, how will this work, and try and give some certainty about what we'll do, by when, for how much, what the expected output will be for that. So it's always still far better, I think, in terms of not having this uncertainty of the hourly billing. But we will also, if it's really small, we're just not going to have that engagement. If the client's just not into it, then sometimes it's just a case of saying, all right, well, let's just do hourly rates and do as much as we can within a budget or something. I mean, we're not so wedded that we won't do it in that way, but it's definitely not the preference, I think. One other approach which I quite like, there's a guy called Jonathan Stark that I follow, and he's quite big on identifying 3 budgets and then working backwards from the budget to come up with some scopes that you're happy with, rather than sort of doing all your scoping and then coming up with what you think the cost will be. So that can be sometimes a nice way to look at it, to try and come up with something that everybody's happy that at this price point we'll deliver something that we're happy with and they'll get value from. And so there's lots of room for creativity rather than just straight into hourly rate.
Yeah. Folks, I want to ask you just another question on this, if we can stay with it for just a second. And it's one that comes up all the time, which is, look, we might want to do all of these different pricing models, but are they going to be accommodated within the regulations that govern what we can or what we can't charge for, or indeed how we can charge? And we know that those guidelines are emerging, particularly from law societies and others at the moment in terms of that. But just a quick word for whoever would like to jump in here about how best to accommodate that, or if you've come up against roadblocks that have effectively made it not possible for you to charge using an alternative method.
Yeah, I can speak to that, Terry. We've got a succession law planning practice, which includes also an estate disputes practice. So it's effectively litigation in the context of wills and estate disputes. We sometimes come up against issues in terms of the scale of costs in the Supreme Court of Victoria, for example. So not long ago, the Supreme Court actually conducted a review, called for submissions about how the scale of costs should be changed. And we put in, with a coalition of the willing of other alternative fee arrangement firms, a submission putting to the court that there were factors that they could take into consideration to actually establish whether a fixed fee price or a price that had been given in the context of a value-based pricing model could still stand up in a cost dispute effectively. And whilst the Supreme Court practice direction around this is not entirely welcoming of alternative fee arrangements for obvious reasons. It's hard to compare an apple with an orange, for example. There is a little bit of wiggle room there around being able to establish it there are some rules that you have to follow in terms of all of the factorial inputs there. So that can be a little bit complex, and sometimes we've just decided actually it's easier to go with the scale of costs than with how we've done the value pricing with the particular client. But for all intents and purposes, there are no real regulatory or compliance issues that we've faced, and certainly, you know, there's no challenges that we've had with making sure that we are complying with our obligations with the uniform law.
Fantastic. Tessa, staying with you for a sec, just picking up a question that we've got here. And it's about how you navigate difficult conversations when an estimate and actual cost may differ.
So interestingly, we don't have that problem because we don't give an estimate. We give a fixed cost, and we give our clients agency and choice, a bit like what Mel was talking about. If you go on to book a ticket of, you know, a flight from Melbourne to Adelaide, you're generally given 3 options, and within those 3 options by the airline carrier, you'll get different there's different perceptions of value in terms of what's included in each of those 3 options, and you make a determination as to which of those options you feel most comfortable with. Of course, price is the major factor, but there are others in terms of what the inclusions are in that offering. So that's what we do with our clients every time. So there is no variance between an estimate and the actual cost. It's one and the same, because the client has actually chosen the cost up front. And so they've got price certainty. We've got cost certainty, which we love as a business. Jean and Mel have both alluded to this. We've got control. We understand what our cash flow and, you know, what our pipeline looks like. And as so too does the client.
So it's one of the advantages, I guess. And staying with that thought, I wanted to ask, follow up with this question to you first, Tessa, if I may. There's probably, and I think we've kind of alluded to, benefits and challenges in moving away from the billable hour. It's not necessarily for the faint-hearted. And I wanted to address some of those with all of you now to kind of really get into that point in particular. So Tessa, what do you see, and I guess I've touched on one already, what the key advantages and disadvantages are?
So I know Mel and I are absolutely singing from the same songbook on this, so I won't spend too much time talking about the benefits, because I know Mel can wax lyrical on that, and I'm with her there.
Where do I start?
Yeah, exactly. But I will just flag some of the challenges, because I think it's really important to be totally transparent and open about that. Terry, you called it a transformation when you're shifting from one pricing model to another. It's revolutionary, and it can be quite radical. And that is because it is not just about switching off your time-based billing technology. It's about switching mindsets and behaviours. And that, as I said, when we did that 13 years ago, some people just could not wrap their heads around it. And I totally respect that, and they opted out. And equally, so too did some of our clients, because they were like, what do you mean? Is this just finger in the air? How do I know that you're actually, you know, doing the work and delivering it and all of that sort of stuff? There's so many questions that people have. I could spend days and days in a question and answer conversation with someone about it, which I'm very happy to do, I might add. But I think it's important to recognise that the shift in mindset and therefore culture is incredibly, it's just a non-negotiable, and it's something that you have to kind of wade through. And if you've got, you know, like Jean's a smaller organisation, that's probably arguably a bit easier as long as you're both on the same, and you both want, you know, you all want the same thing. We're in a situation where we've got 100 people. That requires a little bit more mobilisation. You actually need structures. You need to change the structures. You need to change the systems and the processes. It might involve changing your values and articulating different values that actually enable and create a culture whereby you shift focus to the value that you're creating for a client. You shift focus to outcomes. And importantly, one thing that I've seen as a barrier, and this is controversial, don't hold me to it, but I see it play out in through a gender lens, that some people really struggle to articulate their value. And can really, like, it's very, we see a lot of people initially checks and balances, but particularly women who have been in a time-based billing environment. If you ask, and I was one of them, so big law refugee, had, you know, I say this loosely, but PTSD from my days of having to ascribe my worth and my value in 6-minute units. Like, it actually gives me the heebie-jeebies just even saying it out loud, because it became so much a part of what I, like, my worth in my work. And switching into a different model where there is no kind of, you know, you're not subscribing your time to value. I found it difficult, and I know others have, I was underpricing effectively, because it's like going in and asking for a REM review, or, you know, asking for a pay rise. It can be a really difficult conversation to have, and that's something that we've had to tackle through different coaching, different systems and processes, and, as I said, structures, to ensure that everyone's got the right tools in their toolkit to enable them to have those conversations, and to ensure that we're pricing in a sustainable way.
I suspect that folks think that a transformation of the sort that we're talking about takes a lot less time than it actually does. And it seems from what you're saying, Tessa, that it's really never over, because, and it shouldn't be, that it's something that's being reassessed in a conversation.
Absolutely. It's not a set and forget. Yeah. And I think that's part of the appeal, right, with the traditional model. It is literally set the clock and forget.
Except to remember to enter up your time, though.
That's right. That's right.
Set and forget the record.
Yeah. Well, Mel, I don't want to finish on a negative note, so please jump in and talk about the positives, because I know you will do them justice.
I absolutely endorse everything you've said about the barriers too, Tessa, and it's been our experience as well, that it does, it's a completely different way of thinking, of doing, of it goes through the whole way that your firm works, in a way, which is good, and the positives are good. So one of the things that we really see as an advantage is if you take away timesheets, people being incentivized by time, they will really focus on the outcomes. And Tessa said that as well. It becomes more not so much about the time that you're putting into it, but how do I get the best outcome for my clients? And so that's obviously good from a whole lot of perspectives, because your client relationships are good. But what it also does is it really encourages collaboration as well, because it's not people work hoarding or doing things to fill their timesheet up. It's actually thinking from the start, and the whole fixed pricing, value pricing concepts of scoping and working out what you're going to do first means that you're actually, or what you're going to do for the client means that you're actually thinking about who the best people are to provide that outcome to the client. So from a collaboration point of view, you're encouraging that, and you're taking away that competitive individual nature that I think timesheets encourage, because they're your markers. That's what you're assessed by. And totally agree, Tessa, in terms of what you were saying around that, people not necessarily knowing their value, because if your value is stripped down to the time that you're taking to do things, then how is that creating value for your clients too? It's not, you're not thinking creatively, to Jean's point about how you do things as well. I think also one of the, look, I could go on about the advantages, the certainty that it brings to clients. But one of the other things that I think is really an advantage of this in the world of Gen AI and the opportunities that we have in terms of the way that we deliver our services, not just what our services are, but the way that we deliver our services, is that when you start to look at value, the way that you do it, the way that you deliver it becomes part of the value. So you're incentivized in terms of how you're delivering it, not just what you're delivering to the client. And that's, I don't think the legal ecosystem should be any different to how other service providers work, that they will look at the experience that the clients have and look at the outcomes that the clients want to achieve and the way that those services are delivered. And that encourages you to think differently and more holistically about the services that you're providing. And it also gives the opportunity for those people, those allied legal professionals, to contribute to that value as well.
Yeah.
So many benefits of that from the client's perspective, from the firm's perspective as well, because you're encouraging the collaborative, outcome-based people are valued for the skills that they bring. Different skills are coming to get those outcomes for the clients. So that's where the culture piece comes as well, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Jean, just want to round out this question with your thoughts on benefits and challenges, again, being able to look at this through a slightly different lens.
Yes, so I think we do have an advantage, as Tessa said, being small, we can kind of make it up a little bit as we go. My personal preference, I just don't really like charging by the hour. It usually doesn't feel right. You've either charged too much, or you feel you've charged too much for something that wasn't really that helpful, or sometimes you look at it and think that you've delivered incredible value and you didn't get paid well for it. So I think with this new approach, we all like to know what is it that the client needs to achieve, and what role are we going to play in helping them to achieve that. And that goes a long way to your job satisfaction as well, but also financially. You want to know that well nobody's going to buy anything if they spend $1 and they get less than $1 back if they don't feel that way. Generally, I try and work to sort of a rule of thumb. If they're spending $1, they should be getting 2 or 3 or more back, but not 100. At some point it kind of should be fair, so that whatever we're doing, if it is really different and valuable, we should have a good conversation about what that looks like. So I think it just makes you feel, I hope the client too, that it isn't even going back to can you bill in this way. If you can sort of all be confident that this is what we're getting and we're paying this, but we're going to get multiples of value back. I mean, you don't get disputes. People just say thanks, that's great, pay the bill. So it is really helpful, I think, to go through that process. I think with subscription, we often also feel like if we spend a bit more time on something than we expected, it doesn't really matter because we feel like we'll get it back over the longer term. And sometimes if you've put more time up front, ideally we've created a better solution. And so sometimes we'll tie our pricing, it'll be linked to success of the client. It might be like the number of documents. And so if they're generating much more documents because their practice is growing, because they're working more efficiently, then we benefit in that way. So it just takes away some of that friction, I think, in terms of thinking you're losing because you spent more time on it and you haven't recovered. It's actually just, you've done something that's better for everybody. What else is there that was useful? It just helps us to think more about what this client really needs. Sometimes it's better to actually make the problem bigger and a bigger, more expensive solution if that will actually create more value. So you can have those conversations. That's way more about the long-term relationship rather than just the tasks that you're doing. For us, it was talk about partnerships and not necessarily doing everything yourself. So I think we've sort of made a bit of a move from what we do to knowing what to do and how to do things. And so often, there's value of just saying, look, we don't do that, but these guys are experts in Power BI. You should get them in because they're amazing. And so we help to design the overall solution, and we're still kind of helping to coordinate, and we get paid for the value of bringing other people in rather than worrying about trying to do the whole job ourselves. So there's lots of scope for law firms, I think, to look at their broader network of clients and suppliers and and join people up as well. And I think it just gives you more time to think longer term as well about like what else can you do to help, and what other things would your clients find valuable. And it might even be just things like introducing them to clients or suppliers or investors or employees, or there's all sorts of things that form part of that relationship. And so it's just quite liberating, I suppose, to think about you're in alongside that client and you want them to be as successful as possible, because that means you'll be more successful. So you don't really worry too much about like, what do I do? It's like, how can I help them be more successful, because then we'll benefit through doing that and have a longer term, more valuable relationship. So there's just, there's heaps. It's a much better model, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks, we've got loads of questions on the people bit of this, not surprisingly, which I'm going to try and pull together into one question and direct your way in a second, Mel. But Tessa, I've just want to pick up one of the questions that's there at the moment, specifically around the pricing issue for litigious matters. So if you've got a litigious matter, and obviously you may or may not know where that is ultimately going to go, how does that impact your ability to use alternative pricing methods?
So the answer is it doesn't change how we price something. When we do 3 options to our clients, which is standard, we always are exceptionally clear about what is within scope, what is outside of scope, and which assumptions are we making. So we're very transparent about any assumptions that we're making about things, and we're certainly very clear about what it is that we're proposing to deliver. What are the outcomes that we will create for this client? When there's no exception when it comes to litigation, yes, it can be you're dealing with more vagaries and uncertainties, absolutely, but we usually price for milestones. So it might be, and we'll price in phases, I suppose. So we will say, you know, here's an option, here's a price for us getting you to the first directions hearing, or here's a price for us supporting you to get right through to, you know, drafting submissions for the hearing, full stop. Then we rescope again. Once we have more certainty and clarity. And frankly, that hasn't been a problem for us. One of the beauties, I think, that's often not spoken about in terms of a value pricing model is that you and the client, and this goes to that client centricity piece and the piece about building trusted relationships, you're sharing risk.
Yeah.
Always. And there's, you know, sometimes there's the risk might fall more on our side. Other times it falls more on the client side. But if you've been in it together for a while, so if they're a returning client and we are their trusted advisor, that the beautiful kind of relationship that you develop is that you're in it together. And so there's trust on both sides. And yes, occasionally it might be that it's less profitable for us. And the client does really well out of it. The value that we've created for them, they got at a bargain price. And other times it might fall the other way. But that often comes to the fore in litigation because there are more uncertainties generally. But we just have a process whereby if that happens, we come back together and we rescope.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like a variation with if you're dealing with the builder, for example, except we don't put a big fat 15% kind of, you know, fee on top of it. But it is a bit like building a house or renovating or something. You know, things happen. They start digging and they find, you know, that there's 15 mil of rock or something. So it's similar in that sense, and it's never really been a challenge for us.
But because you're scoping it progressively, it's based on those almost enforced check-in points.
Exactly.
Which is,
exactly
you know,
right.
always really helpful as well.
Yeah.
Let me jump into the next one. As I'm trying to collect a whole bunch of different questions together on this one, and it's the people bit. So, you know, if you're a law firm that has embraced alternative models, which, you know, increasingly accelerated by GenAI, the impact on your people is significant in terms of lawyers and allied legal professionals as well. So, you know, in a typical traditional law firm, the billable hour becomes a measure for remuneration, for bonuses, for performance reviews, for all manner of KPIs, even for your career progression. As you said earlier, Tessa, people even unfortunately measure their worth based upon the number of billable hours. So with that in mind, Mel, as I say, let me come to you first. How do you manage all of that?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question, and Tessa did touch on it before too, because if you take away the billable hour, it underpins so much of a traditional business model. And one of the things is, measures of performance, career progression, all of those things that you just spoke about, Terry. So I don't know. I mean, I was in big law for a number of years, or in law for practicing. And the first thing that when you went into a performance review was the first thing that you got was, here are your dollars in,
Yeah.
And it defaults. That is always what it defaults to. Our lawyers don't have individual budgets. We have team budgets, but we don't have individual budgets. And that's deliberate, because we want people to focus on the outcomes. And so what that has meant is that we've had to rethink the way that we measure. We have metrics and we measure performance. And that has been a gift, I would say, to need to rethink that, because what you then think is what is the role, what is the value that the lawyer is bringing to the firm and the culture of the firm, and also to focus then on what their pathway progression is, what they want, and their strengths as well. So what we did was we redesigned what was initially our performance review process, and made it into a career growth program. It's called Thrive at Hive, and we actually worked out what we wanted our lawyers to focus on, or our team to focus on, not just our lawyers. And then it meant that you move it away from how much money you're bringing in to what are you actually achieving in a more general sense, and what do we value as a firm in terms of what our team brings, and focus on their strengths as well, not trying to fit everyone into a cookie cutter approach. So, what that meant was, when you take away the billable hour, you take away that focus on fees coming in, you can look at technical skills, contribution to the firm, the business skills as well. When we talked about that idea of value not just being what you deliver, but the way that you deliver it as well, innovation skills and human skills too. So it starts to bring in a more holistic way of looking at how you develop your lawyers, how you empower them to do what they need to do, and the contribution that they make to the firm as well. So it has that, I'm going to say, halo effect of, you take away the billable hour, it actually allows you to really assist your lawyers and team to develop those skills in a better way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Mel, how does that then bubble up, or I guess resolve itself in terms of that other traditional aspect, which is that the team has a budget as well as the individuals have a budget? How does that then go, like at that level, team level?
At a team level, it means that you've got the team working really well together too, because they're working towards, the collaboration piece is really important there, because everyone's working towards the same goal, I suppose, in terms of your revenue targets and what you're trying to achieve in a more broad sense as well. And then that obviously bubbles up to the firm side of things as well. I think the real lesson that we've learned around that is your teams have got to be on the same page as well. So that consistency in approach, especially in pricing, is important as well.
Yeah. Tessa, I want to ask you the same question, because I know, particularly in the work that you've done, these have had to be front and centre considerations for you too.
Yes. Yep. So we too have redesigned our whole remuneration and reward structure at Moores. Like Mel said, there's a basic hygiene factor in that we need to be sustainable, right? So there are revenue kind of targets for teams so that they're working towards a sustainable figure. That's a hygiene factor. What we do focus on are the rest of our kind of capabilities and KPIs around employee experience. We measure client experience, and that's for every lawyer as well. We have leadership and culture KPIs too, and that's particularly rests with the supervisors, but we get data around that, and we have check-in points around that. We also, unsurprisingly, given how important it is, we do have metrics around pricing. So empowering and building capability and pricing for our people, because it's such an important part of our DNA and how we do things. We have metrics and KPIs around that too. We have metrics and KPIs around continuous improvement. So how many after action reviews have people participated in? How many how many things have they put onto the innovation register, for example? Like, how are they contributing to making Moores a better place, to continuously improving? We've got metrics around that too. So it is, as Mel says, about looking more holistically at a person's contribution, capabilities, and their competencies, and making sure that we're doing what we can within our control to build and empower the future lawyers of Moores.
It's great points. It is more holistic. There are, in a way, broader metrics, but the emphasis is also different, isn't it? It's flipped, because the emphasis will be quite different in a traditional model as to what you would effectively be rewarded for, or seen as important, versus the sort of models that both of you have been describing. Folks, we're very, very close to time, and I do just want to throw out one wrap-up question for you. But Jean, just wanted to get your thoughts on this kind of the people part, if you like, to wrap that up.
Yeah, we've seen the same need to be holistic. So in New Zealand, we quickly realised that, yeah, the technology is just one enabler, but it needs all those other factors as well. So we've formed collaborations with people that are experts in leadership and change management and marketing and business development, pricing, and then financial systems, and like what gets rewarded and measured, etc. So I think you need to have all of those kind of in place and aligned, or you end up sort of not getting the results. And so if a firm was looking at doing this, I think you would need to be thinking across all of those areas and making sure that you've got plans in each place for how they'll change and be reinforcing each other. So it's the whole thing rather than just one thing that needs to change.
And the thing is, it's always been the best way to run a business, hasn't it? To have all of those things aligned and working seamlessly together. Sadly, we've come to that point where we do have to wrap, and I'm going to stay with you, Jean, on this last question. We've covered a lot of territory in this hour, and it's been amazing, and thank you for that. But just kind of pulling out one thing, what would be your best advice for lawyers and law firms deciding now whether or not to shift away from what they're traditionally doing, the billable hour, and shift to the sort of firms and opportunities and challenges, because there are both, that we've been discussing? Jean, what's your best advice?
Well, it's really interesting looking at where the conversations evolve, because we've been talking about organizations that actually have chosen to do this independent of kind of Gen AI or being forced to. And so I think if I was saying Gen AI is a catalyst, and it might be forcing firms to look at making these changes, but you don't actually have to wait until you're forced. You can start to do this earlier, and the earlier you start, the more you'll have opportunities for trial and error and figuring out like what's going to work for you, and when it won't be so so critical. So I think start early, start small, and then don't try and make it all up yourself. Like there's people like Tessa and Mel have shared advice. I've learned heaps from John Chisholm in Australia on pricing, for instance. Alan Mast, who works with John, Richard Smith. There's people all across New Zealand and Australia that actually have been sort of doing this stuff for a long time. And the worst thing you could do would be to try and just sort of figure it all out yourself and make the same mistakes that are all avoidable. So that would be my main advice. Just get help from people who have already been there and done that, and avoid the mistakes.
Embrace the benefit of hindsight, people. Tessa, what's your best advice?
My best advice is to understand the client need. So actually go and, ask your clients, is this something that would help you? Here are, and provide it as an option really, and test the waters. That's where I'd start. Those that have in-house counsel clients, I think they'd have a resounding hell yes, please, let's do it. Can we start tomorrow? The other piece of advice is to dabble, just test, pilot, trial, pick a particular, like we say, pick a practice area, pick a, conveyancing, for example, something that's high volume, relatively certain. You could test what a fixed fee model or a value-based pricing model looks like on that. Alternatively, a lot of people do blended models. So they might engage with the client and say, okay, for this portion, we're going to do hour-based billing. And for this portion, we'll give you a fixed fee option for that. Just test the waters, because my experience tells me that once you start, you will realize the benefits so quickly that you'll get the taste, and you might find that little bit of faith to take the leap.
Absolutely. So client first, lots of conversations, relationships. Mel, the last word is yours. Your best advice.
Thank you. And I love that I actually had 3 things written down, and Jean and Tessa have already covered them. So just do it was one of mine. Just start. Just test the waters. Start. Do a tasting platter. It was what we did at Hive when we first started. We said, here, we've got this whole lot of things. Just test it and taste it and see what you think. And reach out and talk to people who are we're very generous lot, I think, and we're very passionate about it. So reach out and talk to people who have done it. But I think the main thing that I want to get across is that there is no blueprint to this. And I think the success of value pricing and alternative pricing models is to make it your own, to understand why you're doing it, how it's going to work for your client, your specific clients, your specific areas of practice and your team, and be purposefully motivated to do it and make it your own, and build it as you go. I think that's the best advice I can give.
Yeah, absolutely. Being clear on that purpose and objective, so important. And I kind of close by adding one, which is we're always looking for a 100% guarantee when we change. There's not going to be one. There never was. There never will be. So you have to go back to those sort of foundations that you were all speaking about. Folks, it's always a pleasure to spend time with you. This has been no exception. Thank you very much indeed for your time and being so generous and sharing your own experience and wisdom. And to everyone that attended as well, thank you very much for being here, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Terry.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
Terry.